we're still a couple of weeks away from the opening of the season. Eagles are still the team that garners more conversation than anyone else around here. And it's understandable because a couple of things have come down with the Birds over the last couple of days. And here to give us some insight to that is a guy whose job it is to cover him on a day-in, day-out basis. He does so for PhillyVoice.com and Sports Illustrated. John McMullen joins me here on 94 WIP. How are you, J-Mac?
Doing well. How are you, Jody?
Very good. How many years have the Eagles been your number one beat?
Let's see. Let's get entire Doug Peterson. So about 7 years. 7 years. It's tough to do the math when you get it right.
That's okay. That's why I gave you some time. We got time here tonight, so take your time. So you've been here for the last 6, going on 7 years. Jeff Lurie has been the owner the entire time. Do you think that the amount of influence Jeff Lurie has had on player personnel has spiked of late? Has it always been this way? Has it just become a little bit more obvious and they're willing to say it out loud rather than keep it behind closed doors? This comes off the big Mortensen report this week that Jeff Lurie says they should be looking to help Jalen Hurts out rather than get him competition during this offseason. Is this out of the norm from Jeff Lurie as best you know?
It seems to have ramped up. So I will say that from my perspective, it certainly has amped up. It's interesting, though, because I've talked to some people over the past few days who have been around here for far longer, really from day one of Jeffrey Lurie. And from their standpoint, it hasn't changed that much, maybe other than the overt part of it.
Right.
Behind the scenes, evidently he's always been, whatever term you want to use, meddling, if you want to go in a negative direction, heavily involved, if you want to go in a positive direction. But I think it's pretty clear he does it in a different way than, say, a Jerry Jones, but he's in that same category as an owner who is really, really involved. So I would say he's top 5 of 32 owners as far as being involved with the football aspect, and I don't think that's necessarily a good thing, to be blunt.
That is interesting. You say top 5. All right, if that's the case, if your sources are accurate and you say that they've been around the organization during the whole Jeff Lurie run and you're talking to people who should know, if that's the case, I like the word you used to describe it. This season it seems to be a little bit more overt than ever before. The actual influence may be the same as it's always been, but it's getting talked about in public forums more so than ever before. Why the change?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, if you talk about Super Bowl 52, and I like to make the Jones comparison, and you go back to Jerry and Jimmy Johnson, you know, there's a little bit of a jealousy there with the Cowboys' success. We all know what happened. We all know who got the credit for winning the Super Bowls. So much so that Jerry fired Jimmy and brought in Barry Switzer, and they won again.
Yeah, but they won with Jerry's. They won with Jimmy's players. You know that. Yeah, I know exactly. That. Everybody knows that. Everybody except for Jerry Jones and Barry Switzer know that.
Exactly. And my point is now he didn't do it when Doug was at the apex, but there's a little bit of that involved in the fact that they won Super Bowl 52, finally got over the hump. Doug obviously got a lot of credit as coaches, and by the way, deserved a lot of credit. We've talked about the coaching staff. You know, at that point, common sense tells you, okay, you won a Super Bowl. Here, do what you want. And it was the opposite of that. It really was. It got worse. And I can't really explain it other than, you know, Jeffrey seems to think he was responsible for the success of this team. And, hey, I mean, when you own something, when it's yours, maybe that's natural, but that's the way I kind of see it. I don't know how many other ways you can take it from the hindsight and what has gone on and how the relationship soured so quickly, not only with Doug Pearson, but also Carson Wentz. You got a guy making decisions who, you know, he talks about emotional intelligence. He hasn't shown much emotional intelligence, I'll say that.
That's an interesting way to look at it. And I know there are a whole bunch, because I get the calls that I get here on WIP, and you talk to the people that you talk to, and people respond to you in the forums that you got. Howie Roseman, not the most popular guy here in town these days. And I don't know that Howie's ever been uber popular, but probably his Q rating is lower than it's ever been before. It sounds to me like if you want to get rid of Howie Roseman, give him the most credit of anybody on the team. If the Eagles have an improved season, say it's all about Howie Roseman, and then Jeff Lurie might get jealous and actually start to hold Howie accountable. That might be the best way to get Howie out of the power chair.
It's interesting, but I think Howie's in the power chair because Howie does what he's told in a lot of ways, and you can see, and that's interesting because, you know, I talked about Andy Reid was the one guy who I think, not in 1999, Jody, when he was kind of an unknown, but when Andy kind of became entrenched and became sort of widely regarded as one of the better coaches in the NFL. From the outside looking in, and I was in Minneapolis and different cities, you know, it looked like Andy was left alone. I'm told he wasn't left alone. He was just a better politician. And at times he was able to pacify Lurie. At times he ignored him. And he had the cachet to do that. And I think that was one of Doug's biggest mistakes coming off Super Bowl 52. At that point, he had tremendous power. Tremendous, obviously, you know, nobody's going to fire a guy coming off Super Bowl 52. That's sort of when you try to seize power or try to seize a little bit more of what you want. And Doug never did that. And I think as he looks at that in hindsight, that was the biggest mistake. But, you know, even Andy Reid, yeah, I mean, he was really involved, and just Andy was a better politician. So when you talk about Andy being a Hall of Fame coach and being one of the better coaches of all time, people always focus, and understandably so, on X's and O's and schemes and things like that. The job is far more than that. And that's a perfect example. You have to handle everything. You have to handle personalities, not only players, not only assistant coaches, but even the GM, even the owner. You have to be able to manipulate all of that kind of stuff. And that's what the Eagles need. They need a politician as their head coach. And we'll see if Nick Sirianni can do that.
Yeah, we will see that. Very intriguing perspective that John McMullen's given us on Jeff Lurie and the Eagles here on 94 WIP, which leads me to this question. If your read is right on how Lurie has done his business and how those around him have dealt with him and or played him at certain points, there's just one big anomaly that sticks out like a sore thumb to me, and that's when Chip Kelly won the power play that he did. If Jeff Lurie is a guy who likes to get credit when things are going well in the organization, and that you have to be a politician around him and cajole him and know how to say yes and take your stances and say no. Chip Kelly was never any of those things. He was just a football guy, no better than anybody else, smartest guy in the room, and he flexed his muscles. The Eagles had had some success, but not massive success, not as much success as Andy Reid had, and he was able to wrestle away power from Jeff Lurie and Howie Roseman. How did Chip Kelly pull that off, and why do you think Jeff Lurie, if we've got this overall picture of the way Lurie's been running the Eagles since he bought him, how did he fall prey to Chip Kelly?
Well, a lot of people fell prey to Chip Kelly, but I will say there's a couple things. I mean, one, and you know, in hindsight, you look at Shady McCoy, and at the time, you know, Chip Kelly said, you know, it wasn't necessarily his idea. You know, nobody believed him at the time. Maybe we should have believed him. you don't know 100%, but now as you look back at it, you start to say, okay. And then when Jeffrey finally moved on from Chip, he did say he wanted to regain control of the organization. So he did sense things coming off the rails a little bit, but I think that was more personality driven. He's always been very, as I said, very in tune and very involved with the day-to-day operations with the organization. Our friend, to give you an example, Barrett Brooks on PhillyVoice.com on his show, we were talking about it during the week, and I said a similar thing that I'm talking to you about, Jeffrey, and Barrett remembered when he was here and Ray Rhodes was the coach. And a lot of Jimmy Johnson talk, the different Jimmy Johnson, the tight end, right, if you remember him when he was with the Eagles. So Barrett was telling a story where he was in the complex, Ray was there, and Jimmy was upset, and Ray basically asked Jimmy Johnson, what's wrong? And Jimmy Johnson said, what do you mean what's wrong? You just cut me. Ray Rhodes had no idea he cut Jimmy Johnson because he didn't cut him. And that was a role player, Jody. That was a role player, and the head coach wasn't involved. That to me puts a stamp on what Jeffrey Lurie has been like. And it's interesting, if you go back, Jody, to the press conference when Jeffrey fired Doug Peterson, he said he actually said he hasn't changed in 25 years. I personally chuckled at that. I'm not chuckling at that anymore.
Okay, yeah, John McMullen, our guest here on 94 WIP. All right, if we believe the report that Chris Mortensen came out with, that Jeffrey Lurie is absolutely with a heavy hand directing his organization this offseason, to give weapons, to build things around Jalen Hurts as the quarterback of the Eagles, rather than think about bringing in potential competitors for that position, be it a veteran quarterback or someone with the 6th pick in the draft. If we're to believe this, is Jeff Lurie at least getting it right? We may think that it's just bad business for the owner to be making the key personnel decisions ever in the NFL, but sometimes that owner can get it right. Is Jeff Lurie looking at this correctly?
Yeah, to me, it's bigger than just this one decision. And no, I don't think he's gotten the decision right, because ultimately it should be left up to his football people, Andy Weidl's personnel people, Howie Roseman, which people are not going to like, but nonetheless, and the coaching staff as well should have at least a voice. And they might decide to go in that direction anyway, because they might decide, hey, maybe we'll take a Kyle Pitts and marry him with Jalen Hurts, and that's better than, say, Justin Fields, and then just sticking with Jalen Reagor as your number one threat in the passing game. So they might ultimately come to that same decision, but they deserve an opportunity to talk it over and to put everybody who belongs in the conversation at that number 6 overall pick. But even if it is right, and even if Jalen Hurts turns into a star and a legitimate starting quarterback in this league, it may be a little counterintuitive, but I still think it's bad because, the old adage, a broken clock is right twice a day, but right, it's not going to tell you time consistently. Jeffrey Lurie is not equipped to make good football decisions consistently. And if he gets this right, and he gets further emboldened, who knows where the train is headed at that point.
It could be win the battle but lose the war. I hear exactly where you're going. All right, couple other Eagle moves. We knew that they were going to have to start restructuring certain contracts. They've already done a couple, including, I believe, Isaac Seumalo came down earlier today, which is going to save them money under the cap. It certainly gets them out from a troubled position now, but it potentially and almost likely causes problems down the road because it's just kind of charge card journalism spending you're doing that you're going to pay it off at a later date. It doesn't just go away. You just delay the price that you're going to have to pay. How many more of these renegotiations are we going to have to see between now and the first day of the NFL season?
Well, it was a 182.5 million. So a little bit less. I think most teams thought it was going to come in at about 185. So if you speculate, it was 198.2 last season. If there was no pandemic, you're probably up at 208, 209. So you can see the difference. And a lot of teams are in the same boat. We've seen the Saints are even in worse shape. Everybody's renegotiating everybody. But, one positive sign is Dak Prescott in Dallas because nobody knows better what ultimately the new TV deals are going to look like than Jerry Jones because he's in charge of the TV committee in the NFL. And it's going to explode anywhere from 30 to 50%, probably closer to 50. So the cap's going up. So everybody knows that. Hopefully, obviously certain parts of the country are opening up a little bit more quickly than others. But hopefully we're getting closer to normal. And as far as stadium revenue and things like that, that should increase as well. So I think the Golden Goose is going to be back in business pretty quickly. So from that standpoint, the Eagles are kind of smart to take their medicine. They did it with Carson Wentz. We talked about that a lot, Jody, eating all that money. And it's going to be difficult for them this year. They have to renegotiate everybody. They have to kick the can down the road. But the good news is there is light at the end of the tunnel.
All right, we've got the new NFL year coming up next week. Then we've got the draft 50 days down the line. So using those two dates as the key dates, something's got to happen with Zach Ertz. He could be kept and play for the Eagles again next year at a relatively expensive number off the kind of season that he had last year and just play out his contract and go free agent afterwards. He could be dealt, but if he's dealt, you got to keep him on your salary cap number until after the first of the year, which makes it a little bit difficult, but not impossible. Or he could be cut over the next 5 days. What is the most likely scenario with Zach Ertz?
Well, I know Zach wants to be released, and understandably so, because he would like the opportunity to pick his destination, so to speak, and try to steer things where he would like to. So that's the goal from his camp, and obviously the Eagles would like to get something in return, but either way, I don't think it's going to be a ton, maybe conditional sixth, conditional fifth if you're really lucky. So from that standpoint, is that really worth, as you mentioned, if you trade him, well, that can't go through to the start of the new league year. So you have to carry that, you have to figure that out and be under the cap anyway. So that makes things even more difficult. So ultimately, if you pin me down and saying what's the most likely scenario, I would say they're just going to release it.
Yeah,
I don't think it's worth what they're going to get in return. And it's amazing because I know people are not going to understand that because he's been such a great player, and he has. But, the contract and people understanding the Eagles are moving on, it makes it very difficult to pump up that value.
Same thing with Brandon Brooks, who there are rumors that the Eagles have at least either reached out to teams or teams have reached out to them. There have been conversations about a potential trade with him potentially moving on. Same thing, he's got a pretty big cap number, which would have to carry into next year because you can't trade him until the new year starts. But you could probably get more in exchange for him than you could Zach Ertz because he didn't have the down season that Zach Ertz did. But he had a completely injured season, which is part of what Brandon Brooks is all about. If the Eagles kept him and then tried to trade him after the new year started, what would they get in return for Brandon Brooks?
Well, and that's the thing. If they could get a day 2 pick, which I think is unlikely, then I think you should think about trading. But remember, there's not a lot of cap room saved by trading Brandon Brooks because of his contract. So I do think, if you take Jeffrey Lurie at his word and say you want to build around Jalen Hurts, well, what's the easiest way to build? Everybody keeps talking about receivers and Pitts or Jamar Chase or Jalen Waddle, Devonta Smith, on and on and on. The easiest way to build up a quarterback is that offensive line. And I think the one strength the Eagles have, and there's a ton of ifs here, Jody. If Brandon Brooks is healthy, if Lane Johnson is healthy, we know Jason Kelsey's back. That could go very quickly from a bottom 10 offensive line to a top 10 offensive line again. And that's going to make the quarterback look better. So if I'm the Eagles, and you're not going to get much from a trade perspective as far as return of investment for how good the player is, you're not going to get much cap savings. If I want the quarterback to look good, I roll the dice on Brandon Brooks for one more year.
All right, since we went to the offensive line, I'll ask you to go crystal ball on me here. Who plays more snaps at left tackle for the Eagles? Doesn't have to be opening day, doesn't have to be most. Who plays the most snaps at left tackle for the Eagles this year, Dillard or Mailata?
It's interesting. I think Andre could be traded, but if he's not traded, I would say Andre Dillard. Jordan Mailata is, and I know everyone is really excited about him. He's got tremendous natural talent. He's got unbelievable size, unbelievable athleticism as well. But he's still extremely, extremely raw. And for all the good, there's still a lot of bad. And Andre Dillard was, people forget, he was going to be the starting left tackle last year until the biceps injury. If you go back to his disappointing rookie season, he was getting better at left tackle. When he shifted to right tackle, he was really bad. So, and the Eagles were upset that he didn't sort of put his head down and fight through it when they needed him to replace Lane Johnson. But from a pass protection standpoint, that's still a really, really talented prospect. And I think it's way too early to give up on him. And he's just so much smoother, so much better from a technique standpoint. If he's here, he's going to win that job.
Fair enough. All right, and let me ask you one last question on this, because you would know better than me. Bicep injuries. We've seen them crop up around the league over the last, I don't remember anyone having them when I was a kid growing up. He's out for the year with a bicep injury. But the last 20 years, because they're working out that much more and they use their muscles that much more. So you do see this injury. I don't want to say it's become commonplace, but it happens often enough that we get it, we understand it. My, just off the top of my head, general belief is that when it happens, it's not something that's necessarily reoccurring. Knee injuries, yes. Back injuries, yes. There are certain injuries that when you have them, you have to be on the lookout because it could happen again at any moment. I don't think of bicep injuries that way. Do I have the right read on this, or am I just making this up as I go along?
No, I think you have the right read on it. You don't see consistent, you think about Brandon Brooks we just talked about, and 2 Achilles tears in 3 years, and go back to Jason Peters when he had the 2 Achilles tears, and you think about big guys trying to rehab from that and maybe favoring one side, the other side goes. In the case of the biceps, I don't think, and especially in Andre's case, remember, he got hurt in training camp, so it's been a long time. It's not like he's trying to force his way back a little bit early. Plenty of time to heal. I don't think that's going to be much of an issue, a recurring type thing.
John McMullen from Sports Illustrated and Philly Voice. Always great when we have you on. I'm going to be calling again soon enough, my friend. Thank you for the insight tonight.
All right. Thank you, Jody.
John McMullen, Philly Boys, Sports Illustrated, our guest here on 94 WIP. Some interesting ways to look at the Jeff Lurie era. Not just this past week or 2 weeks or whatever, but his entire time as the owner of the Eagles, that he's been more hands-on than most people know. Well, then why would he be as overt about it as he did this year? I gave you my thoughts. Sean gave you his. I want to take yours. 215-592-9494. Let's reopen the phones here on 94 WIP.
You can text us on the same number you call us on. Wow.
The middle.
That's what I told you, but I got a hangover, man. So
What is this hangover? Yeah, what's with this hangover?
Right,
what happened yesterday?
Cheap vodka, bro. Cheap vodka, man.
What?
Well, I took pineapple vodka with the pineapples, and I infused it for like a
That's
week
too
or
much
two.
pineapple.
Pineapple is
And
terrible.
it was so sweet that you would just keep on drinking, and I just kept on drinking it.
Did you say you took pineapple vodka and then infused it into pineapples?
Yes.
I mean, there's sorority girls right now at Penn State that are laughing at you, Barrett. He took pineapple vodka and infused it into pineapples. Oh,
I thought it would be a better taste, and it was a better taste. It was a great taste. It just went down too fast. Went down way too fast, man. And next thing you know, man, 3 Shades to the Wind,
See,
watching
you got-
Queen Latifah.
Oh, my
This
God.
was
That's the line of the day.
The Middle with Eitan Shander, Barrett Brooks, and Harry Mays. Weekdays from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern.